Well, this is lecture number 92 in the ABCs of Communism series that this time accompanies volume 7 that I'm in the process of writing, which is on communism in Europe. And as usual, we'll be starting with the lower Paleolithic because that's the beginning of the primitive communist period. And of course, this series discusses the sociocultural evolution of humanity from primitive communism to the present day. Of course, in China, we have a complete sequence that goes from primitive communism to the contemporary Communist Party rule of China. But now we're going to be talking about the Iberian Peninsula. I'm going to have to go back and forth with these new glasses so that I can read. When I began my graduate studies in archaeology 50-some years ago, we were studying the European Paleolithic. The picture that was presented at that time was quite different than it is today. In the intervening half-century, there has been a veritable tsunami of evidence that has washed into the universities, so to speak. And when properly interpreted, this is quite valuable information. Non-Marxist scholars have tended to overemphasize the phenotypic aspects of the physical anthropology. A total transformation of such features as stature, body form, hair, and eye color can happen in Homo in 500 generations, that is in 10,000 years. What is critical is the cubic centimeter cranial capacity, because that's what changes as humans learned how to use culture. And of course that's going to be our emphasis. So in our approach, I've been using from the very beginning of Volume 1 a three-grade approach, which is Homo australopithecus, where we have more or less 500 cubic centimeters of cranial capacity, Homo erectus, more or less 1,000, twice that, and then Homo sapiens with more or less approximately 1,500 cubic centimeters of cranial capacity. And we're not going to get distracted by phenotypic features, which some people in the history of the growth of our discipline got distracted by, because in the case of the Europeans, the early archaeologists and anthropologists were all dilettantes of the aristocratic variety, and they didn't like the look of these Neanderthals, and so they tried to classify them as a different group of people altogether, when in reality, as it was proven many years ago by the most important physical anthropologist of the time, the Neanderthals are no different in cubic centimeter cranial capacity than any other group of Homo sapiens, with the possible exception of the fact that they have slightly larger brains. But at any rate, that's just something I wanted to mention here as we start out. This means that people started moving very early into more challenging environments, and we want to know why that happened with regard to the Australopithecines and the Homo australopithecus group. And we're going to be examining that now quite closely, because Europe is the area where we have so many of them, of the Homo erectus variety. This early intercontinental movement represented a de facto need to dump as much unnecessary productive time into as many survival modes of production as possible, and in this way preventing surplus social product accumulation. Now, I had to write some of this stuff down because I didn't have it in the textbook that we, at least at that time. I think I'll probably include this material in the introduction to the entire volume. But there would have been some kind of worldview that justified this movement, this intercontinental movement. However, at bottom, it was survival instinct that propelled this movement. And why is that true? Because surplus social product accumulation would have been lethal, leading as it does to envy, jealousy, coveting, and therefore to the dissolution of man's society. This justification, worldview justification, and its dialectical concomitant of reinforcing collectivity by eliminating lethal accumulation in this way is responsible for that movement of people out of Africa into Asia, and of course eventually they moved not just into Asia and all the way across into China, but up into Europe as well. And we're going to be examining now in this particular volume the spread of Homo into Europe. But I wanted to make these initial comments about intercontinental movement because, as we're going to see, this is further proof of this whole thesis that humanity didn't simply evolve its brain capacity in order to to survive in its environment. It did this, it evolved its brain capacity in order to use culture, and which is a struggle to control the environment, but it's equally important as a struggle to prevent surplus social product accumulation. Now, in this particular lecture, we're going to talk about primitive communism in the Iberian Paleolithic, beginning with Portugal. Now, around 200,000 BP, during the Middle Paleolithic, Homo sapiens neanderthalensis appears on the Iberian Peninsula. At around 70,000 BP, the last ice age began, and the Mousterian culture was established in Portugal. At the 50,000-year-old Escorial cave, there is evidence of human activity in its karst topography. Karst means limestone. The latest surveys made in 1899 have revealed new chambers, and these have resulted in further investigation. The Escorial cave dates to 52,000 years BP, and excavation there is continuing. This is in the Lisbon area, of course. The first occupants of the cave came from groups of what investigators considered Neanderthal hunter-gatherers, who used the cave as a temporary shelter for hunting. As you know, this is an old-fashioned way of thinking about Neanderthals. We know that the Neanderthalensis subspecies of Homo sapiens is just that, nothing more. The appearance of Mousterian technology means we have the appearance of broad-spectrum wild resource exploitation and has nothing to do with variation among Homo sapiens physical types. Anyway, bone evidence within the cave proves these groups hunted nearby aurochs, deer, and horse. Now, elements of rock art are from the Upper Paleolithic, 42,000 to 12,000 years BP, and then from the overlying Neolithic period at Escorial Cave, where the prehistoric art paintings are comparable to those of Altamira and Lascaux. The site was the first in Portugal in which prehistoric art was identified, and the only location with examples of Paleolithic artwork. There have been identified hundreds of motifs, engravings, and paintings of animals, abstract forms, and geometric shapes in this archaeological site. The rock art site is located along the EN 370 motorway between Santiago do Escorial and Alto da Albaneja, approximately 3 miles from the latter. The archaeological site is found in an isolated rural location between the Tagus River and the Sado River basins and the plains region of Alentejo. Now, around 37,000 BP, the Upper Paleolithic Chalcopyrrhonian culture period began, and from northern Iberia, this culture extended into southern France, lasting until 30,000 BP. Homo sapiens neanderthalensis were present in Iberia until at least 30,000 to 29,000 BP. Artifacts of this period are found at the Portuguese Colombeira site and another Portuguese site called Figueira Brava. We have what are described as Mousterian tools and human tooth investigators classified as of the subspecies Neanderthalensis. Moreover, most important is the Portuguese cave of Solemos near Lisbon. The natural cave of Solemos is located in the open of a limestone cornice at the top of the eastern slope of the valley, carved by the Lusa River on its left bank. It is downstream from the village of the same name. It was formed in a meander fissure in the karst topography. It has an average width of 3 feet extending 100 feet. There is continuous occupation from the Middle Paleolithic into the Upper Paleolithic. The latter include the Aurignacian, Gravettian, and Solutrean cultural layers, and the latter includes the distinct Proto-Solutrean and Upper Solutrean strata, and there is a Neolithic horizon atop these. The cave was discovered and initially explored by Albuquerque and Castro in September 1959, and then it was excavated by a team from the Geological Survey of Portugal, headed by Vega Ferreira and Camarate Franco during 2 campaigns, the first in November of 1959 and the second in October and December of 1960. Now this cave presents 2 distinct forms of occupation. It was first of all a local habitat during the Paleolithic and a place for the burial of the dead in the Neolithic era. Lithic and bone industry artifacts, ornaments, and remains of fauna were found in the Upper Paleolithic levels. The recovered material was kept at the Museum of the Geological and Mining Institute, known today as the Geological Museum. Archaeological industries of the Upper Paleolithic in Iberia date 30,000 to 28,000 BP. The Chattoparonian evolved into the Aurignacian culture, and in 1995 at Zafaraya, a human mandible was dated to about 30,000 BP, and Mousterian artifacts characterized by the classic Levallois techniques were dated to 33,000 to 27,000 BP. In Portugal's Lower Tagus, there is no indication of gravitization. Now, the point I want to make here is that what we have going on is broad spectrum hunting and gathering is emerging by 200,000 years ago in Portugal in the form of Mousterian industries, but as it does worldwide, wherever you have Mousterian industries, because that's exactly what they are. They are a proof of the fact, with all of their different tool types, that people had evolved into being able to exploit every different ecological niche in their environment, and that they were doing so. And the concomitant of that is that they had a lot of spare time. And in that spare time, because they wouldn't have to work more than a few hours a day at the most per person in order to get the amount of food that they needed from hunting and gathering, because they knew so much about their environments. And what are they going to do with the rest of that time? Well, they're going to be thinking about the world around them, and they're going to be articulating that and discussing it among themselves. And this is inevitably going to lead to even more knowledge about the world around them being passed down from generation to generation, and eventually is going to overpower itself and explode in the agricultural revolution. So let's move on to Spain. Homo erectus entered the Iberian Peninsula in the Lower Paleolithic as proven by their cultural remains at a number of sites. In 1994, in the Atapuerca region, limestone caves in the cave of Grandolina, where 6 Homo erectus skeletons are dated as early as 1.2 million years ago, and at Grandolina there is evidence of tool use to butcher animals and perhaps to kill other humans. Fire was used to cook their food. Also in Atapuerca is the site of Cima de los Huesos, or Pit of Bones, where excavators have found the remains of 30 humans dated to about 400,000 years ago. The remains of young adults and teenagers being less than 1 million years old, and following the schema we are using in this series, means they are Homo sapiens. They are in association with one stone hand axe, and the deliberate burial of the human remains is supported by the absence of housing at the site. Now, Homo sapiens neanderthalensis remains have been found at a number of sites on the Iberian Peninsula, including the skull found in Forbes Quarry in Gibraltar in 1848. Subsequent Homo sapiens neanderthalensis discoveries in Gibraltar include the skull of a child, and human coprolites are associated on top of baked mussel shells. coprolites are dried up feces or turds. La Breda Cave in Catalonia contains Aurignacian cave paintings and early human skeletal remains in association with fossilized fish vertebrae. These vertebrae are of the genus Salmo. Salmo is a genus of fish in the salmon family, Salmonidae, that includes the European species of salmon and trout. Among them are the familiar Atlantic salmon, Salmo solar, and the brown trout, Salmo truta. In this case, the species were Anguilla. There are Barbus species and Leuciscus species, Rutila species, the Salmo solar and Salmo truta. The vertebrae were distributed at various archaeological levels, and its highest proportion are the Salmo truta, especially in the upper Gravettian level. The brown trout, Salmo truta, is a European species of salmonid fish that has been widely introduced into suitable environments globally. It includes both purely freshwater populations, referred to as the riverine ecotype Salmo truta fario, and a lacustrine ecotype, that is a lake form, Salmo truta lacustris, also called the lake trout, and an anadromous form known as the sea trout, S. truta morpha truta. The latter migrates into the oceans for much of its life and returns to freshwater only to spawn. Then at Zafaria there is a sudden increase or decrease of fossil fish bones in the Solutrean level containing diagnostic shouldered projectile points. This decrease coincides with the period of declining annual temperatures. And finally, the post-glacial Terra Rosa level is characterized by the absence of Salmo truta remains. The Salmo solar remains in the Albreda Cave are from fish caught in the Atlantic rivers on the northern Pyrenean slope and then transported to the areas studied. The early Upper Paleolithic in Spain. The Chattoperonian culture is found in the Cantabrian region and in Catalonia. The Aurignacian culture succeeds it and has the following periodization. And then I give it, but I'm not going to mention all of these periods and dates right now for our purposes, except to say that the typical Aurignacian is also found in Cantabria, in Morin, El Pendo, and Castillo, and the Basque Country of Santa Manine and Catalonia. Radiocarbon dating gives the following dates, and these run from 32,425 to 29,515 BP. Evolved Aurignacian is found in Cantabria, and then I list the sites, and Catalonia. Finally, Aurignacian is found in Cantabria at the El Pando site and after the Gravettian interlude. In the Mediterranean area south of the Ebro River, Aurignacian remains have been found sparsely distributed in the lands of Valencia, at Los Mayetes and Murcia, at Los Pirineos, and in Andalusia at Higueron, and as far west as Gibraltar, at Gorham's Cave. The carbon-14 dates available are 29,100, 28,700, 27,860, respectively. The remains of a child, dated to approximately 24,500 BP, known as the Lapido child, were discovered in Lagar Bello in Laria municipality. The cranium, mandible, dentition, and postcrania present a mosaic of European, early modern human, and Neanderthal features. Ian Tattersall and Jeffrey H. Schwartz consider it probable the individual was a modern human part of the Gravettian culture. I think it is just more proof that Joseph Birdsall was correct over a half-century ago. He proved in his classic textbook in physical anthropology, entitled Human Evolution: An Introduction to the New Physical Anthropology, that Neanderthal is nothing more than a local manifestation of Homo sapiens. The Cap Press and the Cap Money granting institutions are committed in their anti-communist line to proving that there are no laws of universal socio-cultural evolution, and one aspect of their silly commitment is to continue the falsehood of competing Homo species battling it out in a social Darwinian contest for world domination. Well, at any rate, that's the end of that story. Now, the Middle Upper Paleolithic Gravettian in Spain. The Gravettian culture followed the steps of the Aurignacian expansion, but its remains are not very abundant in the Cantabrian area in the north, while in the southern region they are more common. In the Cantabrian area, all Gravettian remains belong to late evolved phases and are found always mixed with Aurignacian technology, which is the succeeding cultural sequence. The main sites are found in the Basque Country, and I name them Cantabria, and I name those, and Asturia. Now, it's archaeologically divided into two phases, characterized by the amount of Gravettian elements. Phase A has a carbon-14 date of 21,000 roughly BP, and Phase B is of a later date. The Cantabrian Gravettian is the same as Perigordian 5 through 7 of the French sequence, and it eventually vanishes from the archaeological sequence and is replaced by an Aurignacian Renaissance, at least in El Pendo Cave. It is considered intrusive in contrast with the Mediterranean area, where it probably means a real colonization. In the Mediterranean region, the Gravettian culture also had a late arrival. Nevertheless, the southeast has an important number of sites of this culture, especially in the land of Valencia, and then I list them. It's also found in the land of Murcia, and I list all of those sites. Now, the first indications of modern human colonization of the interior and the west of the peninsula are found only in this cultural phase, with a few late Gravettian elements found in the Manzanares Valley of Madrid and the Salemos Cave in Portugal at Alentejo. And that brings us to the Solutrean culture that shows its earliest appearance in Dordogne, France, and then in Spain in the land of Valencia, Las Mayetes, with radiocarbon dates of around 21,000 to 21,710 to 2890 BP respectively, and in the Iberian Peninsula it has three different facies. The Iberian facies is defined by the sites of Parpallo and Les Mayetes in the province of Valencia. They demonstrate continuing Gravettian material cultural traits, proving their origin in that preceding culture. From bottom to top, Parpallo and Las Mayetes caves, this sequence is seen throughout all of Spanish Solutrean sites, including the land of Murcia and Mediterranean Andalusia. Upper or evolved Solutrean, including bone tools and needles, follows, where there's a sterile layer with signs of intense cold of the Würm glacial maximum, which is roughly 20 to 22,000 BP, depending on where you are, corresponding to the Wisconsin maximum over here in the North America. Full Middle Solutrean dated in its lower layers to 20,180 BP, and then finally we get down to the initial Solutrean. These two caves are near other sites including Guarané Blanc, Meravelles, and Rates Penais. They often show continuity and are called Gravetto Solutrean. The Cantabrian facies shows two markedly different tendencies in Asturias, that is northwest Spain, and the Vasco-Cantabrian area. The oldest findings are all in Asturias and lack the initial phases, beginning with the full Solutrean in Las Caldas in Asturias and other nearby sites, followed by evolved Solutrean with many unique regional elements. Radiocarbon dates oscillate between 20,970 and 19,000 BP. At Las Caldas Cave and the surrounding partial nature reserve is a protected area covering 60 acres in the Nalón Valley in the municipality of Oviedo near the towns of La Piñera and Las Caldas. The cave itself is 200 feet long with three entrances. The main cavity is 16 feet high and contains a subterranean river. It is important archaeologically because of its Solutrean and Magdalenian strata containing the Venus of Las Caldas, a Magdalenian antler carving with an ibex's head and a woman's legs and genitals. It may be either a Venus figurine or a decorated atlatl type device. There is Paleolithic rock art, including two stylized overlapping female profiles on an engraved rod dating from the Middle Magdalenian, and a stone plaque displaying a woman's stylized profile, a whale, and two bisons engraved onto a sperm whale teeth, a high-quality unused rock crystal laurel leaf point, and engraved horse teeth and horse bone carved with bison heads. In the Vasco-Cantabrian area, instead, the Gravettian influence seems persistent, and the typical Solutrean leaf-shaped elements are in a minority. Some transitional elements that prelude the Magdalenian, like the monobisellated point spear point, are already present. Most important sites are Altamira, Morin, Chufin, Salitre, Ermitia, Ashura, Lesatixi, and Santa Migne. This is obviously proves Solutrean as predisposed to be Magdalenian, in other words, evolving into it. Hello, kitty. The Altamira Cave is next. In 2016, British director Hugh Hudson released the film Finding Altamira, about the discovery of the cave, starring Antonio Banderas and with music by Mark Knopfler. This show is streaming on Netflix on Altamira Cave, describing its discovery and now famous Paleolithic art. Therefore, now I shall restrict my comments to the relevant primitive communist occupations. The cave is over 3,000 feet long and consists of a series of twisting passages and chambers. The main passage varies from 20 to 18 feet in height, formed through collapsing the calcareous rock of Mount Vispieres. Around 13,000 BP, there was a rockfall that sealed the cave's entrance, preserving its contents until its eventual discovery, which occurred after a nearby tree fell and disturbed the fallen rocks. Archaeologically, we begin from the bottom with artifacts from the Upper Solutrean, dating 18,500 BP. Occupation continued through the Lower Magdalenian, 16,590 to 14,000 BP. Human occupants of the site took advantage of the rich wildlife that grazed in the valleys of the surrounding mountains, as well as the marine life. That cat likes to jump up here from time to time when he gets bored. Of the surrounding mountains, as well as the marine life available in nearby coastal areas. People lived at the cave mouth, although their paintings were created throughout the length of the cave. The artists used charcoal, ochre, and hematite to create the images, often diluting these pigments to produce variations in intensity and creating an impression of chiaroscuro. They also exploited the natural contours of the cave walls to give their subjects a three-dimensional effect. The polychrome ceiling is the most impressive feature of the cave, depicting a herd of extinct steppe bison of the species Bison priscus in different poses, and two horses, a large doe, and possibly a wild boar. Solutrean paintings include images of horses and goats, as well as handprints that were created when artists placed their hands on the cave wall and blew pigment over them to leave a negative image. Magdalenian paintings include abstract shapes in addition to animal subjects. For our purposes, you want to note, first of all, the amount of time and effort involved in planning and executing the art. At the very least, it is obvious that many of the people in the band or tribe were involved, and this is an indication that they had, too, a lot of spare time. That is, it was one way to spend time doing things that did not produce surplus social product. And three, furthermore, considerable time had to have been spent contemplating the worldview and ways of presenting important aspects of that ideology. For, finally, the entire cave complex constitutes proof of a broad spectrum wild resource exploiting capability as described by Ken Flannery and popularized by Professor Kotak. Well, we'll move on to El Morrone, the archaeological cave site located in the Rio Ason Valley of eastern Cantabria, Spain. The cave opening is about 850 feet above sea level. The cave opening is about 42 feet high, 40 feet wide, and 393 feet of stratigraphy. El Morón has the longest, therefore, continuous sequence of Upper Paleolithic prehistory of Cantabria, Spain. The site includes human occupations from 41,000 BP into the historic period, and these include what investigators called Mousterian. And that brings us to Chufin Cave, which is in the town of Reclones in Cantabria at the confluence of the Lamazon and Nansa rivers at a point with steep slopes. Upper Paleolithic levels of occupation are 20,000 years old. The cave had some small-sized, deep, subtle engravings and paintings of red deer, goats, and cattle, exhibiting a large number of symbols. One group, called type sticks, accompanies the paintings inside animals. Many drawings are puntillaje, or points, including one that may represent a vulva. And that brings us to northern Catalonia. 1 million years ago, Homo sapiens shared the landscape with other large fauna, such as the mammoth, hippopotamus, and rhinoceros, as well as carnivores such as hyena, jaguar, and wolf. Here they left evidence of their occupation at sites in Catalonia with stone tools and animal remains. Especially noteworthy are Cueva Negra, Barranco León, and Fuente Nueva in the south, and Atapuerca in the north, where archaeological evidence for this occupation is described as early Mode 1 technology. By this, they mean the tool kit that occurs widely across Europe at this time. Mode 1 stone tool kits of Africa and Portugal are the same, so it seems clear that these sapiens evolved first in Africa and then Portugal from Erectus forebears. Early Solutrean is followed by scarce middle elements, but with well-developed final Solutrean. It is related to the French Pyrenean sequence. Its principal sites include Cowlin Goges with its Solutrean flat retouch and notched projectile points, and Reclau Viver and La Arbreda. Near Madrid, the earlier Solutrean findings were destroyed in the Civil War. Now we come to the late Upper Paleolithic. This phase is defined by the Magdalenian culture, where in the Mediterranean area the persistence of Gravetto-Solutrean traits is the proof. In the Cantabrian area, the early Magdalenian phases show two different phases. The Castillo phases evolves locally over final Solutrean layers, while the Roscano phases appears in most cases directly over the natural soil, where there are no earlier occupations of these sites. In the second phase, the lower evolved Magdalenian, there are also two phases, but now with a geographical divide. The El Huyo phases is found in Asturias and Cantabria, while the Basque Country phases is only found in the Basque region. The dates for this early Magdalenian period oscillate between 16,433 BP for Roscano cave, that's the Roscano phases, 15,988 and 15,179 BP for the same cave in the El Huyo phases, and 15,000 BP for Altamira in the Castillo phases. For the Basque Country phases, the cave of Abans has given a date of 15,800 BP. A stone tablet found in Abans cave in the Navarra region of northern Spain contains the earliest known representation of a landscape. Engravings on the stone that measure 7 by 5 inches depict mountains, meandering rivers, and areas of good foraging and hunting. A team from the University of Saragossa spent 15 years deciphering the etched lines and squiggles after unearthing the artifact during excavation of the cave in 1993. Now we can say with certainty that it is a sketch, a map of the surrounding area, said investigator Pilar Utria, who led the research team. Whoever made it sought to capture in stone the flow of the watercourses, the mountains outside the cave, and the animals found in the area, unquote, she said. Now the Middle Magdalenian shows less abundance of findings. The Upper Magdalenian is an extension of Magdalenian 5 and 6 in northern France. Accordingly, its diagnostics are harpoons. A Again, there are two facies called A and B that appear geographically intertwined. Facies A, 15,400 to 13,870 BP, is absent in the Basque Country, and facies